56,000, I think, of those votes, and you can update me on the votes that went your way and the percentage that it represents from a national perspective, or in other areas provincially where, you might have made it into the top 5. I haven't seen that. But some would say, compared to other parties who are also very fresh-faced in the election space, you haven't managed to gain the traction perhaps that you were seeking.
No, look, naturally you'd want more. And maybe, Iman, if you don't mind, given that everyone is here, maybe let me just go through our full store and then talk a bit about how we view the elections and what we thought, what we felt we needed to do. So let me set out in many ways. The first starting point is that when we started BOSA, we wanted to engage communities. And when I look at the election board all across the country, we've got votes all across provinces. And now the work that we've got to do is to ensure that, firstly, that we begin to enhance and grow that support. The second thing is we have parliamentary representation, and that will be determined in a bit as to how many seats that looks like. So that's a very important step. I think we've put a foothold here in Gauteng. That's also a very, very deliberate and an intentional thing. This was an election like no other. So in many ways, one of the difficulties that have taken place in this election is the fact that you've got, if you like, ethnic mobilization that has taken place, in the sense that you've got growth of, if you like, MK, Zulu nationalism, you've got, in some ways, PA, you've got all of that took place, which makes this election a very difficult one. But we feel in a country that is polarizing, that is moving in that direction, we need to restore the space of holding the center. And so in these elections, sure, we could sit back and say, did the center do well? Did it make the right traction? That's a good question, and we've got to build it.
Before, there's a lot of journalists here and I don't want to hog the mic, so two quick things before I allow everyone else to have the opportunity, Mmusi, is number one, did anyone give you a call? I mean, have you been talking to anyone? Got to know that. But number two, this ethnic mobilization thing is concerning. When Greta Mantashe said the other day, he talked about Zulu tribalism, for example, and creating and, kind of amplifying those schisms in South African society. It didn't go down very well with a lot of people, and it sounds like you're kind of reiterating a similar message. So just clarify for us what you mean by ethnic mobilization.
What I'm saying is that if you look at variants of the ANC, so MK, ANC, EFF, these are parties of similar. 2/3 of South Africans are just there under voted for those parties. And each of those parties are moving to the extreme left or to the left progressively. The center has been left open. The center of a multiracial society. The center of economic policy that is mixed. That has been left. And so my job now is to build that. That's really what I mean. And I think that's important. It's an important job in a country where I have to ask myself, given that if BOSA wasn't on the ballot, who would I be voting for? And therefore, we have to put BOSA on the ballot for South Africans like myself who want to see a multiracial society, who want to see a mixed economy, who want to see the center being built, who want to see communities being empowered.
Has the phone been ringing?
My phone's always ringing. But look, at the same time as that, yeah, sure, let me leave it at that. I think my phone has the most...
It's been calling.
My focus now, Iman, is to really build BOSA. We will look out to see what the coalition formations look like. I am not, as I said to you even at the start, our only demands are straightforward. Let's fix Eskom. Let's make sure that South Africans have a job. We've got to not think in politics. We've got to think for the 60 million South Africans. So my response and call to people is that let's get all the leaders of the parties in parliament. Let's have an adult conversation rather than a political conversation.
Sorry, Mr. Maimane, I'm not sure if I missed this, but we are seeing a lot of reaction around, from ANC. We're seeing a lot of reaction around the objections. As Boba South Africa, is there any issues that comes up? Are you, as a political party, calling for a recount as well?
No. I think we've seen some challenges. There were places where lines were obviously too long, particularly in urban areas. We've seen the issues with zap machines. I've got some concerns in the Western Cape, but we won't be lodging objections in that sense. Let the IEC deal with that. We've now got to get on with the work that happens post this election. So from Build One South Africa, we're not going to be contesting the particular elections. We're taking a journey forward. We've got to move on from there.
Do you have any issues with how these elections have been run?
I mean, it was a tough one. I think that there are a couple of things that didn't happen that should have happened. I'm not sure the IEC did enough of an education around the 3 ballots issue. I think there were certain communities where we had some security issues. I certainly experienced that. I think that we've got to get past this thing in South Africa where in certain VDs, people were voting until 11, 12 o'clock at night. That impacts in urban areas. We should know that and we should have prepared better for it. But overall, I think the IEC, in my view, should get at least it should get a pass for these elections. I think the team that's led by Saimama Bolo, it's important that we protect it. And the election observer missions, certainly having engaged them in the last couple of days, have certainly given me their own perspective. Yeah, with the challenges that are here and there, but I think South Africa can say, relative to elections in Africa, we've done a decent job.
There's also a lot of talk around South Africans voting along ethnic lines. Do you agree?
No, I did raise that point in the beginning to say that naturally South Africans have voted for variants of the ANC, if you like. Of course, I think when I see maybe in some ways what happened to some representation. One of our arguments is that when I say we've got to build one South Africa, I fear that South Africans could arrive at the poll and express their race rather than their ideals. And that's something that requires a centrist government to be able to build so that we come together as those parties that share those ideals to create a bloc. And that's one of the things I'm working on. So you asked me the question about who's been calling. I'm working with those parties in the middle who want to create a shared bloc that's, say, a multiracial society so that we defeat that very issue. Because it could be dangerous for the long-term trajectory of this country. We cannot literally, otherwise what we need to do is take the census results and then say those are the election results. And that's not the country we want to live in.
Sorry, Mr. Maimane, quite quickly, we see that with a lot of these objections that there could be a scenario where we are plagued with court battles following the declaration of the results, which could result in a delayed forming of a new government and then risk having to rerun these elections. What is BOSA's take on that?
Yeah, as I said to you, I've watched what the IEC has done. This is my 6th election, so I've seen this movie before. I think that, what meets the threshold on free and fair elections is an important task. It's not going to be perfect. Free and fair is not perfect. Free and fair has its own threshold that needs to be met. And I think, by and large, I've accepted the results. We've dealt with that. And if parties want to raise their objectives, that's their own issue. But what we don't need is to keep a country in a space where we are in continuous litigation about election results, rather than in fact formulating a government. And I think one of these elections proved the first simple point, which is that the opposition writ large, the broader opposition, has triumphed in this moment. The ANC is now, if you like, a minority party in that sense. And therefore, it's an important moment for us to take cognizance of, because it is important that a party is held accountable for load shedding, unemployment, crime going forward. I cannot, and for me, it remains to be seen. What's got to happen now, the job now, is to get adults in the room, make sure we think for 60 million South Africans, not for political parties, build a new center, because if the center collapses, I can assure you, you are going to end up with ethnic mobilization becoming a permanent theme of this country, and we can't have that.
I mean, given the way coalitions have played out in our metros and in local government, do you not foresee a disaster that's about to unfold?
No, that's why I'm saying I can't reiterate this again. Let the 12 party leaders that are going to be in parliament, we need to have an urgent meeting. We need to have a conversation about how do we think for the 60 million South Africans. Let's create a government that works and is stable, because on the 16th of June, for argument's sake, that's potentially after Parliament has convened and all of that, South Africans need to know that there's a tangible plan for electricity, for safety, for their own economic growth. We are certainly open to doing that. I am so committed to that process that I'm saying to all the leaders, even those who have been calling me, to say this has got to be a moment where we strip aside political patronage, but really focus on ultimately what this country needs. We've got to think for the 60 million. I can't say. I'd rather not get into that at this point in time. But as I say, for us, however disappointing with some of the numbers that we got, we're confident that BOSA is in Parliament, it's on the board. It's important that we build on from here, and we'll continue to fight for an education that works for our kids, for communities that are safe, and ultimately for a job in every home. That's what
Mmusi,
we're about.
Final question from me is, so, there was a lot of posturing going into this about who you'd talk to, who you'd partner with, who would be left out in the political cold. But a lot of analysts are saying it's down to the knife edge right now, given the way the numbers are shaping up. A lot of decisions and, thought processes you had before these elections go out the window. It's about political survival and whether, you face an existential threat depending on who you partner with. So just talk to us about, okay, you don't want to say who's called you, that's fine, fair enough, but who will you not partner with, absolutely?
Look, I think for me, in my view, there have been 4 scenarios that have been put on the table, right? The first one is naturally an ANC with a conglomeration of parties. I'm not certain that that's sustainable, given some of the challenges that we could face about that. There's an ANC IFP kind of conversation, and it may very well suit KZN, etc. There's a ANC DA conversation, and then there's a ANC MK conversation that has its own problems. My conversations with people have been about how do we avoid a leadership instability, how do we avoid a recapture of the state. So maybe the short answer is, let's not deal with people who are corrupt, whose interests are going to be about looting. So even if it was a conversation with the ANC, for argument's sake, it could not be premised on people who would sit in the list, who were listed in the State Capture Commission. So that's always, for me, if you want to clean up the state, you've got to do a proper job now.
Thank you.
Yes, they've got more black supporters since you left. What do you say about that?
Sorry, Zara. Firstly, I think most analysts could tell you the truth. What happened to the DA's marginal growth, as they describe it, is a return of Freedom Front Plus voters. We got 3.6 million votes in 2019. They got 3.3 million votes. Surely, guys, if you were the official opposition at a time where the government lost over 14 points at the polls, and you can't even gain 1% of those 14, like you can't grow by beyond 1%, and then you want to browbeat and say you've done extraordinarily well, I think it's disingenuous at best.
Mr. Maimane, don't you think it's high time coalition talks become public?
Yeah.
Instead of being behind closed doors, don't you think it's time for us as the public to know what are being discussed in these coalition talks?
Of course. I certainly would agree with you, and what I would suggest as a going forward, that's why I think Parliament is in some ways a very good space to meet, because in that space, it's the space of transparency. And I can't hide my call. If you are going to create even a sense of a government of any national unity or any sense of national interests, as it were, let it be done publicly. Let the people get to know, and that's why Parliament is a space that's always transparent, because then you'll know what is fair, what is right. I think I agree with you. Some of the backdoor dealings have got their own problems, because you're talking money, you're talking all sorts of things. That's why I reiterate this point. Let there be a meeting in Parliament with leadership that ensures that we think for the 60 million, not for the narrow few.
Mr. Maimane, what's the chances of a rerun of the elections?
We haven't raised an objection. We're keen to get on with the business of government. South Africa can't wait. So I'm not part of that whole campaign. No, I think I responded to that earlier to say we're not necessarily a part of any objections. Take the thing going forward. We've got to focus on going forward. So parties that have raised the objections, I think the IEC must deal with those, but we're not part of it. That's great. Thank you so much.
All right, that was leader of Build One South Africa, Mmusi Maimane, just reflecting on their results in the 2024 national and provincial elections, confirming that they do not intend to object the outcome. They want to get on with the business of the day. Not confirming who he's speaking to right now. As you can see on that leaderboard, no one has an outright majority, so several conversations are going to take place after the declaration of those results. He's also spoken about the DA's results in these polls, saying that this was or marginal results of Freedom Front Plus voters rather that left the party in 2019 when he led the DA in those polls and now have returned. He's also criticized the DA for celebrating but not being able to benefit off of that loss of the governing party in the 2024 national and provincial elections. Over to you, Griselda.